But I ask for your attention now. We have a special guest, a keynote speaker for lunch, somebody who the River District has had the pleasure of working with for many years now on the interstate issues, representing Southern Nevada and trying to maintain a tradition that those of you who have been at our seminars in the past will recognize that while we spend our time looking at Colorado and Western Colorado and the Upper Basin, as we look at our accounts and our responsibility as one of the Upper Basin states, it is an inseparable river. We have created some artificial dividing lines for administrative purposes, but in fact, it is an entire river basin, and we are 7 states sharing that river basin and its resources. And so we have maintained a habit of making sure that the lower basin is represented and their voice is expressed here. So, consistent with that, we have John Entsminger here this year, and John is actually coming home. John's a Colorado boy who went to law school here in Colorado and has an undergraduate degree from UNC in Greeley. John is the Senior Deputy General Manager for the Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Las Vegas Valley Water District. He reports directly to the General Manager. I don't think anybody really knows who she is anymore, so really is all John. He's been there since 1999. That means he's been involved with a number of the big river negotiations and milestones that have been achieved in that time, including the interim guidelines, which you heard Malcolm describe a little bit, and then more recently some of the issues that were also referenced in agreements with Mexico, and now with ongoing discussions among the 7 states under and consistent with the interim agreement that was entered a few years back and provides us interim guidelines until 2025. But now we're looking at a bold new future that you got a glimpse of, excuse me, in some of the climate forecasting. So without further ado, I asked John to come up and join me, take over the microphone, and provide our lower basin perspective, if you would, please. Please help me welcome John Entsminger.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much for the River District for inviting me here today. As Chris mentioned, I grew up in Colorado. In fact, my great-grandparents on my father's side homesteaded just north of Hayden, and on my mother's side, my great-grandparents were sugar beet farmers in Brush. So why do I bore you? Thanks, John. Thanks for going through your family tree for us. It's because my job is to protect the interests of Southern Nevada. But in my experience, the best way to do that is by thinking as a citizen of this basin. We have accomplished a number of groundbreaking agreements in this basin in the last 20 years, and the key to doing that has been thinking holistically. From Rocky Mountain National Park to Tijuana, this river has issues, but none of us have unique issues. All of us are in this together. So let me go through sort of the Las Vegas experience for you to show you how we're dealing with ours. Now first, the Water Authority. We get a lot of questions about what the Water Authority is, and it doesn't actually sound like it's all that different in concept from the River District. We have 4 county commissioners, 3 city council people that sit as our governing board. We're responsible for the wholesale water supply of about 2 million people in Las Vegas and Clark County. Now, I'm not here to whine about only having 300,000 acre feet of water, but when you have 1.8% of the legal entitlement to the river, you tend to draw attention to yourselves. And why is that? Why does Las Vegas get an inordinate amount of attention in this river? Well, first, to some extent, we're a victim of our own marketing. We have marketing campaigns that promote a culture of excess to our tourist base. You see pictures and how many television and movies about, the Strip and all of the, profligate water wasting that's going on the Strip. And I'm going to talk later in the presentation specifically about what those numbers actually are. So we're high profile, we get it. But why else? We're the only entity that actually takes water out of either Lake Mead or Lake Powell for direct domestic use or agricultural use for that matter. And because our facilities in Lake Mead are important for us to be able to provide a secure water supply, the river and reservoir management has a direct impact on our facilities in a way no other user on the river has. So I think that's number two, why we're out there a lot. But number three, and I think most importantly, when you have 1.8% of the river, you have no choice but to get creative. You have no choice but to engage with your partners and find a way to stretch those resources and get new resources. And we've been on the front line of really pioneering some of the innovative approaches that this river has seen develop in the last 20 years. So we heard a lot today about the drought. And for the drought, for us, it's in our backyard. Lake Mead is down about 100 feet from where it was in the year 2000. And this is what the August 24-month study means to us. There's a couple things on this slide I really want to point out. You've heard about the August 24-month study. You know that Powell is going to release 748 this year. So that blue line shows what that actually means for Lake Mead. Assuming we get 748 this year, which we know we will, if we get 748 next year, Lake Mead's elevation goes from about 1105 today to 1062. So we're dropping, a little over 40 feet in the next 24 months, assuming normal hydrology. That the CRSS for that second 12 months assumes that we have 100% for next year, and there are scenarios, if you look at the 106 traces, where you could see as little as 7 million acre feet released next year. Secondly, the green line is our own modelers running the model, and what that shows is if we replicate the 13 years we just had, for the next 13 years. We start over again in 2000, see the same hydrology. That's what happens to Lake Mead. Now the light pink line represents the 15 feet above our upper intake. Right now we have two intakes in Lake Mead. And at 1050, we know the upper intake goes out of service. The pumps are located at 1050. The pumps will be out of water and can't pump at elevation 1050. But this is uncharted territory for us. Lake Mead has never been this low. Not since Hoover Dam was built in the 1930s has Lake Mead been in the 1060s, 1070s range. So our engineers are telling us, you're going to start to see a vortex at about 1065, and you lose operation of that intake somewhere between 1065 and 1050. Now this chart basically shows, we were just talking about the 07 guidelines. This shows the elevations at which the lower basin takes shortages and the quantities of those shortages. Now, I'm sure there's quite a few people in this room who are saying, the upper basin takes shortages all the time. Maybe there's even people saying, it's about time the lower basin took some shortages. And I'm not going to disagree with you. I can go get my vintage Carl Mecklenburg jersey and we can all, have a beer together and do some first class lower basin bashing. And that would be fun, right? The lower basin needs to learn to live within its 8.23 million acre feet. It absolutely does. But this is not, as some would say, only a lower basin problem. We have three major pinch points on this river. What does extraordinary drought mean in the 1944 treaty with Mexico? Nobody really knows. Does California really get to keep using 4.4 million acre feet when we cut off Phoenix and Tucson, as some would advocate under the 1968 Act? And does the lower basin really believe that we can keep using 7.5 million if the effects of climate change continue to be seen in the lower and the upper basin is looking at only having 2 or 3 million acre feet to use? Those three things don't live in reality. We have to come together and solve those three pinch points institutionally. So back to Lake Mead. What are we doing about this? Well, first, we're building a third intake, which I'll go over in quite a bit of detail. But first I want to talk water quality. For most people, a drought means I don't have enough water. For us, the first thing it means is we have too much warm water. If we have to pull water from the thermocline, the upper 20 feet or so of Lake Mead, we have significant water quality challenges in Las Vegas. If in standard operating conditions, if we're pulling from the bottom of the lake, we have trihalomethane formation after about 4 days of that water being in our valley water facilities. If we have to pull from the thermocline, that same THM formation takes place in a day. It's impossible for us to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act if we have to pull water from the thermocline. So, I'm sure, I would think you've all probably heard of our third intake, but have you actually seen what goes into making this thing happen? First of all, it's an $817 million project. We're not getting a dime of federal money. The ratepayers in the Las Vegas Valley are fully absorbing a project that is not going to increase our capacity by 1 gallon. This is a redundancy project. This is a health and human safety protection project in the face of this drought and climate change. This is a picture of our tunnel boring machine. It's 22 feet in diameter, so it's not as tall as this room, but it would fill up a big chunk of this room. Each one of those yellow discs is bigger than this podium. They weigh 300 pounds. But the geology underneath Lake Mead is so dense, you can see this. That's one of those yellow cutter heads. That high density steel flattened, drilling through the geology underneath Lake Mead. We've also run into a lot of problems underground. This is essentially a mining operation, 400 feet underground, drilling a 3-mile, 20-foot tunnel underneath Lake Mead. You can see the water inflow. We've had days of 10,000 gallons per minute of inflow. You can see inundation events where you have large, heavy equipment inundated, but we have soldiered on. We've kept going. And we now believe this project should be operational in the first quarter of 2015. I'm going to talk a little bit about our groundwater project. And I would tell you, this project is about as popular in Nevada as another major trans-mountain diversion from the west slope to the east slope would be in Colorado. People don't like it, and we understand why they don't like it. But we're appropriating water within the perennial yield of these basins. We are not converting agricultural water to urban uses. And quite simply, we need to diversify our portfolio. So in 2012, we had 2 major milestones. The Nevada State Engineer granted 84,000 acre feet of new water rights. And then right at the end of last year, the Secretary of Interior granted the main right-of-way for the project. And really, this is why we need this project. We provide water service to 7 out of every 10 people that live in the state of Nevada. And they're 90% reliant upon one water source that we've all seen is incredibly variable and incredibly dynamic. So we need, in the next 2 to 3 decades, to position ourselves to diversify that portfolio and get off of our 90% reliance on the Colorado River. Now, in addition to getting new assets, like the groundwater project, we have also been working hard on the Colorado River. And you can see going down this list, we have paid Arizona to bank their unused water in their aquifer for us. We have allowed California to bank our unused water in their reservoirs. We have directly injected a full year's supply into our own aquifer. We've built reservoirs, Drop 2, now called Brock Reservoir in Southern California, to capture over deliveries to Mexico. We've spent about $500 million diversifying our portfolio on the river, and as a result, we have over 1 million acre feet in temporary water supplies available to us. However, we need something at the back end of that, and that's again where the groundwater project comes in, so that when those temporary supplies are exhausted, we have a permanent supply to rely upon. So we're back to the Strip, right? Again, we're looking at these evil fountains at Caesar's Palace. And here's one thing I want to show you. Everybody looks at the front of Caesar's, right? This is how big Caesar's Palace is, and this is how many water features there actually are. The water footprint of Caesar's is actually fairly small, and even what we do use in ornamental fountains is far outstripped by what's used by evaporative cooling. It's a very, very low consumptive use. How low? Our resort industry on the Strip uses 3% of our water. Last year, we depleted off of the river, consumptively used off the river, 235,000 acre feet of water. So 3% is, what, 8,000, 7,000 acre feet? 7,000 acre feet of water for 70% of our economy. And I don't mean Las Vegas's economy, I mean the state's economy. That 3%, that 7,000 acre feet of water is about 70% of the state's general fund. So I know in the lower basin, ET on alfalfa is 8 acre feet per acre. Upper basin, pasture grass, alfalfa, what, 3.5, 4 acre feet per acre? So tell me, would you trade or protect 70% of your economy for 3,000 acre feet of alfalfa grass or pasture grass? I'm not asking anybody to trade anything. I'm just trying to put into context how little water the Strip actually uses compared to some of the hyperbole that often goes around Las Vegas's water use. And here's why we can do it. Las Vegas is different than Denver. We're different than Albuquerque or Salt Lake or Los Angeles. A lot like Grand Junction, we sit on the banks of the Colorado River. We don't consumptively use anything we use indoors. It's essentially a closed loop. It's 99-point-something% of the water that we use indoors is treated and put back in Lake Mead, and we can take that water back out. When Denver takes water, that water, if they have effluent, goes into what, the Platte, or, it's gone. Same thing with Los Angeles. They use it, purple pipe, out into the ocean. But we could leave every shower on the Strip running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. We wouldn't consume any more water off the river. Now, there's good reasons not to do that. Your power bill would go way up. But we have to focus outdoors. And we have. We have spent, this slide's a little bit out of date, we've actually spent $200 million now to date paying people to take out grass, because that is where we can conserve. We've actually, if you took an 18-inch piece of sod and laid it around the globe, we've taken out enough grass to go 2/3 of the way around the globe. And this lesson isn't only for Las Vegas. This basin, grass is where we use water. Whether it's Sudan grass in Imperial Valley, whether it's Bermuda grass or bluegrass in one of our municipalities, whether it's pasture grass or alfalfa grass. Grass is what, 85% of the consumptive use within this basin? When we start talking about how we're going to move into the future, when we start talking about adapting to the possibility that we really only have 10 million acre feet or 12 million acre feet to share, that's the conversation. It's not urban versus rural. It's not ag, it's all of us. Whoever has grass has a problem, and we're gonna have to find a way to maintain our economies, but use water more efficiently. So, we don't only focus on grass. We've instituted wide-ranging requirements for time of day restrictions, days of week restrictions. You see here, we got a lot of flack for this commercial. I wish I had brought the video. But, the commercial starts off, and it's a urban lawn. The sprayers are spraying out onto the sidewalk, and the little old lady rings the doorbell, and the guy opens it, and she does what she does. We don't care that we got a lot of flack for this, because you know why? It made our community talk about conservation. You have to push some limits in the water industry to get people's attention. So, what does that mean? What have we done in our backyard, literally? In 2002, we consumptively used 325,000 acre feet of water off of the Colorado River. You've already heard me say, last year we consumptively used 235,000 acre feet of water off of the river. In the span of 11 years, we have reduced our consumptive use from the river by more than a third. And at the same time, we have increased our population by 400,000, which is about 25%. So a 25% population growth with a 33% reduction in consumptive use. It's not whether our cities grow, it's how our cities grow. Cities can grow without increasing their water footprint. That doesn't mean we don't need to diversify our supplies. It doesn't mean we don't need to secure our supplies with infrastructure, and in our case, our groundwater project. But I heard Eric say this morning that the number one driving factor in reduction in irrigated acreage was going to be urbanization. And that's a future, that's a possible future. But I don't believe it's a necessary or preordained future, because I do believe using Las Vegas as a model, and there are other cities that have done extremely well in this area, that there are ways for our cities to grow without your grandfather's ag to urban transfer concept. So, but it's going to involve working together. It's going to involve talking about what are essential uses. A lot of people think essential uses is, can I take a shower? Can I wash my dishes? Other people think it's, can I wash my car? We have a habit of building our cities in the West next to mountain ranges, and that has a habit of causing us very bad air quality problems. Essential uses include some level of outdoor water use. We need to be able to irrigate our trees. We need to be able to keep turning carbon monoxide back into oxygen in our major metropolitan areas. So when we start talking about what constitutes an essential use in an urban landscape, it's not only what is used indoors. So, we've talked a lot about the basin study already, so I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to talk about, again, why should the upper basin care? If this is a lower basin problem, and if the lower basin needs to live within 8.23 million, what's in it for the upper basin? Why do you need to continue to be our partners? Now, my 5-year-old did not get a hold of a box of Sharpies. This actually says, and this, one point I want to make clear, this is the good news. This chart is based upon 20th century hydrology. This chart is based upon the 106 years of flow record that we have. As Eric said, it includes a 30-year period with almost 18 million acre feet of runoff, a situation we've only seen, 4 or 5 times in the last 1,400 years. So if we're fortunate enough to get another 106 years, like the last 106 years, look at that green line. 10% of the time, Glen Canyon Dam doesn't generate electricity with good hydrology. Now for me, I used to talk a lot like Eric was talking this morning in terms of looking backwards. You know, I went so far as to tell people at times on climate change, I'm an apathetic agnostic. I don't know and I don't care, because I can look backwards and be just as scared as any climate scientist can have me looking forward. I don't feel that way anymore, because what I feel now is we're looking backwards, and you could have these eras, these decades of 10 million, 12 million in a natural cycle. But if we lay human causes on top of that, and we have to start anticipating scenarios where you could go below 10, where you could have 9 million or 8 million acre feet, I think we have to include that in our planning. Now, I'm not going to get into the religious debate about climate change, but a prudent water manager is planning for some pretty dire situations on the Colorado going forward. Same thing for Lake Mead. With the good hydrology, we're in shortage every other year. 50% of the time on the blue line, we're below 1075. And if you really don't want to sleep at night, you start looking 5% of the time, we don't have access to either of our existing intakes. We lose 90% of our water supply for 2 million people 5% of the time. Those are unacceptable risk levels, and we're all going to have to come together to figure out how to avoid them. So how are we going to do it? The first thing is, I think we have to stop thinking about Lake Mead and Lake Powell simply as reservoirs. Both of these systems, you heard earlier speaker talking about the Upper Basin Fund. I mean, all of your CRISP reservoirs, all of your endangered species compliance, the funding for the federal government, all of these things are tied into that Upper Basin Fund. And having the Upper Basin recognize and partner with us that maintaining elevations in Powell and elevations in Mead, I believe is the next step in our partnership efforts, our diplomacy, to get past some of the traditional ways that these reservoirs have operated. Second, you've heard me say it. I don't think it's solely an urban growth issue that's driving the need to conserve more water. I think it's incumbent upon all of our sectors, agriculture and urban, to figure out how to be more efficient and ultimately to use less water. And finally, we're realistic. We believe we need to pursue augmentation opportunities. We have engaged with our partners in the lower basin to look at a number of inland desal projects. We believe that desalination projects in coastal Mexico on the Pacific side are realistic within the next couple of decades. We are going to need to bolster our supplies. So, in closing, I'm sure we have most of us here are probably parents or grandparents. I have 2 kids. This isn't one of them. Too cute. Our children need to think like citizens of the basin. The days of our parochial interests, this district and this state and that state and this basin and that basin, have to come to an end. We have to approach this from a basin perspective where there are not winners and losers. We might all be losers in the sense that we all have less water to use, but we can't cast it as one state, one region is going to have water and the others are not. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Nope. I'll be happy not to answer any questions. The question was, what's the average rainfall for Las Vegas? Nevada is the driest state in the union. Average rainfall annually for Las Vegas about 3.8 inches.
What day does it come on?
Every year, I don't know, every year the day changes, but every year it comes on one day. I would say seriously, in the all this weather we're seeing on the Front Range, and my family is in Douglas County, so I don't think they're getting the brunt of it. Las Vegas, as of yesterday, had measurable precipitation for 21 days in a row. It shattered the old record of like 10 days. So it's nothing like the Front Range has seen, but this tropical depression we've seen come off of the Pacific is actually getting a lot of water into Southern California. A lot of the big ag districts down there are using less water. So we are seeing a benefit in the elevations to Lake Mead from this system.
John, Pat Holroyd was quoting that saying something to the fact that we should expect a declaration that American West relative to the drought. And that was clarify what she was saying.
Sure. The way the story came out, it essentially sounded like she was saying, the president or the governors should declare an emergency and get FEMA money involved. But really what she was saying is the drought that we're seeing, and Eric put up some of the numbers earlier, what does this river system support? 12% of our land base in the lower 48, 10% of our population, 25% of our GDP. Her point was this drought could easily be construed as a natural disaster of the same magnitude and same economic effect as a Hurricane Katrina or a Superstorm Sandy. Just because a drought takes 20 years to have its full impacts versus 20 hours in the case of some of these faster moving natural disasters doesn't mean that as a nation, as a national government acting as an insurance pool, that we shouldn't proactively look at ways to secure our water supplies. So it wasn't so much let's declare an emergency, it was a think about the drought the same way we think about other emergencies and take proactive measures rather than waiting for all of the negative effects to fully manifest themselves. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here. Last year I attended Governor Hickenlooper's drought conference down in Denver, and they had a presentation representing the green industries, the landscaping community, nurseries, and so on. I was incredibly disappointed by that. It was more of an emphasis and actually showed really bad zero-scaping about how not having more water is going to affect their property values, real estate resales, home builders industry. We didn't talk about how there are opportunities for drip irrigation installation or introducing more water, drought tolerant plants. It's more about the $20,000 jobs they would lose if they weren't doing business as usual. So what I'm wondering is how did you get your green industries, your landscaping communities, your home builders, your realtors on board with this reduced lawn theory?
Well, it was incremental. We've had, we used to call it our Cash for Grass program. The DEA told us we had to stop that. But I guess it'd probably be okay in Colorado now, so if Denver Water wants to use our old name, they could do it. We call it Water Smart Landscapes now. We've had a program where we're paying people to take out grass since the early 90s. And it was voluntary, so you probably didn't have that backlash at that point because if people were paying to do it, they were employing landscapers to do it. By 2000, certainly by 2002, we had codified our drought plan. So SNWA came up with the drought plan that included no more new construction, couldn't have any grass in the front yard. You were limited to 50% of your landscapable area in the backyard and a number of other things. But then we went to each of the cities, the county government, each of the water districts, and put those into ordinances and rules. So I think it's because we had a decade of a voluntary program to get people used to the idea of educating them that the lawn they had in Racine when they moved to Las Vegas, you just can't live that way there. So we educated for a year, or 10 years. We've had a $20–25 million budget in our education programs for every year. And then when it became necessary, when we saw 2002 hit and we had that 25% year and the reservoirs started to crash, when we made it mandatory, it didn't cause as much of a backlash.
What is your water rate compared to other cities of your size?
Well, it keeps nudging up. and that's one of the things about conservation. We have to be honest with our constituents. Conservation isn't free. You saw us, that 30% reduction. The corollary for our customers using 30% less water has been 5 or 6 rate increases in the last 9 years. So you're going to use less water and we're going to charge you more for the amount of water you use. That's the reality of urban conservation. Our rates, we're right about the 50th percentile 2–3 years ago, and we've raised rates since then. So I think we're probably at about the 15th percentile, at least in the 17 western states. I don't know if that applies nationally, but among municipalities of more than 1 million people in the 17 western states, we're in the top 15% in water rates. Yes, sir.
So with the interim guidelines ending in 2026, what do you envision the next set of guidelines to look like? Like what has worked well with these guidelines and what maybe could be improved from these?
Well, I think we still have some learning to do. I mean, the whole point of having interim guidelines was so that we could operate the rivers in a different way, or the reservoirs in a different way for 20 years and find out what that looked like. I would say one of the things we're talking about now is whether or not you would have more trigger points and different release volumes. And I'll give you an example. This year, the 748 was declared by, about that much. I mean, it was literally less than a foot, that. And there were voices in the lower basin that were saying, look, we should do something. We should get that reservoir, if we can raise that reservoir by 6 inches, we could have a normal release. But the result of that would have been, okay, you raise it 6 inches and then you release 750,000 acre feet more water, pull it down. So in a future set of guidelines, could I see something where you say, at that elevation, you're going to not go so quickly from 823 to 748, but maybe you have an interim step at an 8 million or 7.9 and more elevations so that you start giving yourself some more flexibility rather than just having these big steps at some fairly arbitrary reservoir elevations.
As a water authority, how are you engaging the land use community? And secondly, conservation can only take you so far. Where's the water in the future going to come from?
Well, I'm not sure the land use community, do you mean agriculture? Or
Communities, counties, the growth that's occurring in Las Vegas?
Well, that's one of the nice parts about the fundamentals of SNWA. Everybody in Clark County, that includes all of the outlying areas, has a vote on our water authority. So Boulder City, with 50,000 residents, has the exact same vote as Las Vegas Valley Water District that supplies 1.4 million people with water. So it's a setup that is both bicameral in the fact that it represents, everybody, one man, one vote, but it also, we have special voting provisions, say, for our capital plan, where our 4 purveyor members all have to vote yes. So little tiny Boulder City has basically a veto over our resource plan, over our major construction and capital plan. So almost by its nature, I think SNWA takes into account what you're talking about. The future water, I've said this before, I don't believe there's a silver bullet, but I think there might be silver buckshot. I showed you our groundwater project. I talked about desal opportunities. I talked about our conservation program, and in combination, and other things that can be done on the river. Can the humid desalting plant be run? How can we get more efficient at the bottom of the system so that we don't have some of these over deliveries at the bottom of the system? Those sorts of investment will continue. Yes, ma'am.
It stays in the system, and Las Vegas just gets to build another house. Do you have what I thought the gentleman was asking about planning? Do you have any plans to do some kind of steady state growth and maintenance and not continue to grow if the climate continues to be the way it seems to be going, when it's really not going to be more water?
John, can you repeat the question?
I don't know if I can.
Build a house every time we save water upstream.
No, we're not going to build a house every time people upstream from us conserve water. And part of what I'm trying to get across here is most of our new construction has very minimal consumptive use of water. We know we have to live within our means, and I believe we have, walked the walk. Can you name any other area in the Colorado River Basin that's reduced their water consumption, 33% in the last 10 years? We know that we cannot anticipate anything above our 300,000, period. But in reality, we're planning for a future where we don't have access even to our full compact entitlement. And we do not intend to grow on the backs of others and on the conservation efforts of others.
One more question? If not, please join me in thanking John again.